Myrtle Beach, South Carolina is the beach. It's also the perfect place to enjoy the holidays. Here you get all the holiday cheer you can handle, plus 60 miles of beaches and endless fun. There aren't many places where you can celebrate the holidays or ring in the new year with an ocean view. This time of year is great for horseback riding along the shoreline, fishing from chartered boats or in the intracoastal waterways, and golfing at any of the 80-plus award-winning courses. Take a holiday from the average holiday season at the beach. Plan your getaway to Myrtle Beach, South Carolina at visitmyrtlebeach.com.
Myrtle Beach, South Carolina is the beach. It's also the perfect place to enjoy the holidays. Here, you get all the holiday cheer you can handle, plus 60 miles of beaches and endless fun. There aren't many places where you can celebrate the holidays and ring in your new year with an ocean view. This time of year is great for horseback riding along the shoreline, fishing from chartered boats or in the intracoastal waterways, and golfing at any of the 80-plus award-winning golf courses. Take a holiday from the average holiday season at the beach. Plan your getaway to Myrtle Beach, South Carolina at visitmyrtlebeach.com.
My conversation with Bloomberg News reporter Leah Nylen started out kind of nerdy. I actually want to start this episode in 2017 with a note in the Yale Law Journal.
Yeah.
The writer, then a student at Yale Law, made a novel argument about antitrust law. And I am fairly certain that you know what I'm talking about.
I do indeed.
She knows because the woman who wrote that article, or note as they call it in the Yale law world, is now the chair of the Federal Trade Commission, Lina Khan, the youngest ever in commission history.
So Lina Khan wrote what, is sort of like a rock star academic article. And that does sound extremely nerdy, I know. But for antitrust law, this was like a viral article, which, things don't really go viral in the antitrust world. But she wrote this article that argued that the way that the U.S. had been applying antitrust law to online companies, particularly big online players like Amazon.com, was completely wrong.
For years, the thinking in antitrust was that the most important thing was the price that consumers paid. Low was good, high was bad, end of story.
But one of the things she argued is that that allows companies that want to engage in what's known as predatory pricing, i.e. selling products for below the cost that it costs to make them, that lets them do that sort of flagrantly. And because of the internet, that makes it super easy to sell things for free. And, you're not actually charging a monetary price, but sometimes you are sort of charging a price in another way by collecting a lot of data about a person or, requiring them to turn over personal information. And this was like a revelation for a lot of people. Nobody had ever thought about it that way. And so it was just very, it was like a tidal wave went off in the antitrust world.
5 years later, that tidal wave has come to Washington. Today on the show, why that makes Silicon Valley pretty nervous. Congress may not be reining in big tech, but Biden's agencies are hard at work. I'm Lizzie O'Leary, and you're listening to What Next TBD, a show about technology, power, and how the future will be determined. Stick with us. Are you ready? Because this has been the worst start to the stock market in 50 years, and Goldman Sachs warns the best case for stocks is to break even. But Bank of America's chief investment strategist has a recommendation. Real assets can offer investors protection against these conditions. Real assets like contemporary art. Because the last time inflation was this high, contemporary art appreciated more than gold, real estate, and the S&P. Masterworks is opening up this contemporary art market to investors with over 550,000 members and $500 million in art under management. Even as recently as August, Masterworks sold a painting for a 33.1% net return to their investors. Masterworks paintings have sold out in minutes, and there is a wait list, but you can skip by using the promo code TBD at masterworks.com. That's masterworks.com, promo code TBD. See important Regulation A disclosures at masterworks.com/CD. This episode is brought to you by Best Buy. This year, let Best Buy be your holiday hype partner. Whether you're searching for exciting gifts, trying to snag the hottest holiday deals, or looking for ways to simplify the giving and receiving experience, Best Buy is here to help. Best Buy has the best assortment of impactful tech gifts, along with fast and free fulfillment options and great deals all season long. Maybe you're looking for an air fryer to help the aspiring foodie in your life unlock new recipes, or a new phone or camera for an aspiring filmmaker who's turning their passion into a side gig. Or you might be on the hunt for a new smartwatch to support a friend's wellness journey. No matter what you're looking for, Best Buy is your giving destination for everyone on your list. And Best Buy makes it easy to get your gifts how and when you need them with free next-day delivery on thousands of items, as well as same-day delivery and in-store pickup options. Shop great deals on gifts now at Best Buy. If you know anything about the history of antitrust in this country, I'm willing to bet it came from history class, when you learned about Theodore Roosevelt.
The present conditions of business cannot be accepted as satisfactory. There are too many who do not prosper enough. And of the few who prosper greatly, there are certainly some whose prosperity does not mean well for the country.
That's Roosevelt in 1912. He cultivated a reputation as a trust buster, someone who broke up the big companies that controlled railroads, sugar, and oil, and were enriching only a few people. If you want to be more accurate, most of the credit for trust busting should go to the Supreme Court. But this era, Roosevelt's and later William Howard Taft's, is the first big inflection point for U.S. antitrust. A later one, the start of the modern era, came with Robert Bork. Yes, that Robert Bork, President Reagan's failed Supreme Court nominee.
So Bork wrote this book that said, antitrust has never really had a defining principle aside from, anti-corporate power. And really, the way that antitrust should be applied is thinking about the consumer. And he developed something that has come to be known as the consumer welfare standard. And the hallmark of the consumer welfare standard is that you think about any business conduct or any merger in terms of how it will impact the ultimate consumer. Is this merger going to result in lower prices for consumers? If so, it's good. Is it going to result in higher prices for consumers? If so, it's bad.
This standard dominated the world of antitrust, basically from its publication in 1978 to fairly recently. That's when, Leah says, it began to be viewed as a little too narrow.
But that people have come to sort of think of has some drawbacks to it because it sort of tends to reduce everything to price, for one. And there are often other factors that you might take into account. If you're looking at two different things that you're going to buy, price is definitely a factor. But if you happen to know that one is higher quality, maybe you're willing to pay a little bit more for that product, knowing that it might last longer or something like that. There's been some concern that this consumer welfare standard that was really associated with Bork and the Chicago School has led antitrust today to sort of ignore important aspects like innovation and quality.
Perhaps surprisingly, the presidencies of Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, and Barack Obama were not that dissimilar in terms of antitrust. Yeah, you had the government's big case against Microsoft, but by and large, it was a business and merger-friendly era.
Just throughout that entire period, there was a lot of consolidation. We went from having perhaps a half dozen different cell phone carriers to today there's only 3 that you can really use for phone service. We had a lot more supermarket brands. We had tons and tons more food brands. Today there's only a few huge conglomerates that sell a lot of food products. Amy Klobuchar, who's one of the leading senators on this, likes to talk about how we have had concentration in everything from cat food to caskets. For most products, there are maybe 2 or 3 companies that you can go to, and that didn't used to be the case.
The consumer welfare standard seems to make a lot of sense for a whole bunch of different agencies. But the reason I'm talking to you today is in a lot of ways about tech. And it feels like that's the place where it starts to have some obvious holes. And I wonder if you think that maybe antitrust regulators weren't ready for tech, weren't thinking about how big tech was going to change the way people live their lives.
I think that's definitely true. I mean, for years you heard people saying, tech is great for consumers because it's free. And it's true, like there are all of these products online that don't cost you any money. But I think that we've sort of grappled now with the idea that these products weren't ever really free. You were just giving something other than money. You were giving up some information about yourself. You were giving up a little bit of privacy that the company was going to take this information and aggregate it to better sell you ads or something along those lines, And that's where the consumer welfare standard really did break down, because it had never really contemplated a problem with a free product before. And regulators didn't really think about that because, yeah, it's good to have a free product, but it's not good to have a free product if that's the only option. You always do want there to be a choice for consumers. Yeah, you can take the free one, but here's this other one that gives you a little bit more privacy and for a little bit of money. But the problem was all of these free products began to dominate their industry so quickly that they sort of ended up putting out all of these other companies out of business.
It's also worth noting that in the earlier part of the 2000s, big tech simply didn't get the scrutiny that it does now. Even in 2013, after a pretty lengthy investigation, the Obama administration declined to sue Google.
So there had been some concerns that Google was preferencing its own products in search results. And what that means is, like, when you would go and search for something like tacos, Google is going to put the companies that have paid it ads for tacos at the top, maybe the ones who have paid it the most money for ads on its little map, above any of the organic search results. So maybe there's actually like a really great taco place down the street from you, but that company is going to end up being a lot lower in the search results because of these other ones that Google is preferencing. So the FTC looked at this for 18 months, and then they voted 5-0 to close the investigation. And they found that there was nothing wrong with this. They said Google's search results on balance are great for consumers. And a lot of people who had complained about this were really defeated by this moment when the FTC was essentially saying, everything's fine, here, move along. Because it had literally put a lot of companies who were offering competing products, sometimes better products, out of business just because of the volume of searches that happens on Google. Google is, for a lot of companies, the gateway to how they get traffic. And the FTC just sort of decided to close the probe and move on.
But internally, some people within the FTC did recognize the problems with Google search, just not the commissioners.
It didn't come out until later that actually the FTC staff had recommended suing Google on part of it. And the commissioners sort of ignored that recommendation and opted to close the case. And in particular, what was really interesting about it is that the FTC really didn't understand that people were moving to mobile phones. This was the time when mobile phones were still sort of new.
A lot of people with white-collar jobs still had BlackBerries, not iPhones, and others hadn't switched to smartphones.
And so the FTC just didn't understand that people weren't always going to be searching things on their desktop. They were going to start doing on mobile phones. And Google, interestingly, had these contracts with Apple and a lot of the browsers to ensure that it was the default search engine on phones and mobile browsers. And at the time, the FTC saw this and said, we think that's a problem, that locks up this key gateway that another search engine might need. And the FTC didn't do anything about it. Now, fast forward to 2020, and that is the thing that the Justice Department ends up suing Google over. So like this thing that actually they knew about in 2013 nothing ends up happening about it until 2020.
Did you expect the Biden administration to come out with this sort of repudiation of the Obama approach when they came into office?
Not really. I mean, Biden said nothing really about antitrust in his presidential campaign. I mean, that's not usually that weird. Like people don't usually have like an antitrust
policy. It's not like
policy.
a sexy stump speech.
Yeah, like people have healthcare policies. They don't always have like antitrust. But if you remember, there were actually two candidates who made a lot of their campaign platform about antitrust. Elizabeth Warren, like one of her main stump speeches was that we needed to break up the big companies.
It has been far too long that the monopolies have been making the campaign contributions, have been funding the super PACs, have been out there making sure that their influence is heard and felt in every single decision that gets made in Washington.
Amy Klobuchar, who was another Democratic nominee at the forefront for a while, also made antitrust a core plank of her platform.
When we're in a situation where 78% of the seed for our farmers is controlled by two companies, and our railroads now for Class 1 are down to 4, the same number as on the Monopoly Board, I think we are now entering what is essentially a new Gilded Age, and we need to take on the power of these monopolies.
So for like Biden to sort of say nothing was a little bit strange. And then, like, he comes into office and there is immediately this drumbeat by the progressives and the anti-monopolists to sort of go with their approach to antitrust over sort of what we would call, like, maybe the more business-friendly Obama approach. And so he sort of shocked everyone when one of the first people he announced on tech policy was Tim Wu, who is a good friend of Lina Khan's at Columbia University. He's the guy who coined the term net neutrality and has also been like a very progressive figure on antitrust.
Part of the reason that Biden's antitrust team is worth examining is that Congress has failed to make any real progress on legislation aimed at big tech. What would you say are the hallmarks of Lina Khan's approach so far?
There's a couple things that Lina Khan has wanted to do differently. One, she's very fond of sort of going back to the actual law as it was written and suggesting that they sort of follow it as written, which actually, if you know anything about the Supreme Court, that's almost like an originalist interpretation. But Lina Khan has said, these laws are on the books. If they're still on the books, we should enforce them, and maybe we should enforce them exactly as written. And because these laws, a lot of the antitrust laws were written really broadly, that could give the FTC a lot of authority to challenge things. The FTC's main law says that it can challenge, quote, unfair methods of competition and deceptive business practices. I mean, those are pretty broad authorities. You could challenge a lot of things under that. So she's been very fond of saying, that's what the law says, that's what we should do. Another thing that she has proposed is actually creating some rules. So the FTC has primarily been a law enforcement agency. It brings cases against companies. And she has suggested, we do have the authority within our statute to write some rules. So why don't we actually try and write some rules that define what we mean by an unfair method of competition? We could say, you can't do this. That's an unfair method of competition. Don't do that. Instead of just sort of like leaving it up to a case-by-case basis.
How would that work in practice?
It's pretty interesting. They make this argument that bright line rules are actually really good for everyone because then they know exactly where the line is. There are some things that are pretty obvious, right? Like you shouldn't pretend to be the U.S. government if you're not. You shouldn't pretend to be IBM if you're not really IBM. So they've started like a rulemaking that says you should not pretend to be somebody you're not, which, I mean, that probably seems really obvious, but it had never before been a rule.
They should hang out on Twitter a bit. She's also done something that I find kind of interesting, which is like trying to get these different parts of the agency to talk to each other, which also seems
really funny.
On its face, fairly simple. And yet I gather from your reporting and others that like that wasn't happening.
Yeah. So the FTC is sort of an interesting place. It's primarily divided into 3 different bureaus, they call them. One is focused on competition, one is focused on consumer protection, and one is focused on economics. And those 3 bureaus almost never spoke to one another, which, if you think about it, is sort of absurd. Like, you have some of the foremost experts in the world on consumer privacy and how online businesses are impacting consumer privacy, and they were not talking to the people down the hall who were doing investigations into how business conduct or mergers in the online space were impacting consumers. And I mean, this was something you really saw in the Google case from 2013, was their colleagues, the folks in the consumer protection division, really did understand online advertising. They really did understand the importance of the move to mobile in a way that their colleagues in the Competition Bureau had no idea. And so some of the things that the folks in the Competition Bureau just like asserted as true about Google and the future of the internet were completely contradicted by the FTC's own reports on online privacy and the online advertising industry. And so one of the things Lena Khan did immediately upon coming in is saying, we're breaking down these silos. Like, they make no sense. We are like dividing ourselves unnecessarily. We should really start, using our own expertise on these issues to aid ourselves.
When Lena Khan first took over, some people in Silicon Valley were worried or were trash-talking her. And Leah says there was good reason for them to be concerned, especially when it comes to things like the potential deal between Microsoft and Activision.
I mean, that's a really interesting one. Microsoft is, obviously the maker of Xbox. It is also the number 3 company in the world, interestingly, ahead of Google. And it is proposing to buy Activision, which is one of the largest game publishers. They make Call of Duty and some of the other most popular games on game consoles. And they need FTC approval for this deal, and they may not get it. I mean, Lena Khan and her other commissioners have said one of the things that they are most concerned about is when technologies are changing.
Especially as we see the advent of new technologies, of potentially alternative platforms. I think whenever you see potential moments of transition, that's when enforcers need to be especially vigilant, because that's when incumbents often panic and realize that to stay relevant, to stay dominant, they may have to engage in tactics that ultimately end up being illegal.
The interesting thing about gaming is more and more of it is moving to the cloud. In the future, you might not need to buy an Xbox or a PlayStation or a Nintendo. You would just use your phone or tablet to access one in the cloud. And right now, Microsoft is sort of a leader in that space. And there's a lot of concern that if they acquire Activision, that they will have like a library of games that is unbeatable for that nobody else would really be able to compete. The FTC has also challenged Meta over this acquisition of Within, which is the maker of a virtual reality fitness app. Meta is the maker of Oculus, the most used virtual reality headset. And Within makes this very popular fitness app called Supernatural. And the FTC sued over this acquisition because they argued that this was really Meta trying to buy up a potential competitor and sort of dominate in the virtual reality space. Because, right now, virtual reality is pretty popular among young men. But the fitness industry could bring it to a lot more people, particularly older folks and particularly women. And so, like, by sort of acquiring the most popular fitness app, like, Facebook is sort of insisting that, its headset is going to have the best library of games and that nobody else could possibly, challenge it. And the FTC is filed a case against this. It's actually going to trial in December, and we should have a decision by the end of the year.
I think it can be hard when you're talking about something like antitrust to understand, if you are not a reporter, not a lawyer, like what the implications are for how you and I live our lives What do you think regular people should take from what you've seen at the agency so far?
Yeah. I mean, I like to tell people antitrust is not really that complicated. It's just the rules for business about how to play fair. And its goal is to make sure that consumers get the best offering that they can. So, I mean, yeah, it gets complicated with a lot of economics and people throw around fancy terms, but at base, it's just about fairness. Fairness in business and fairness in competition. And I think that's really what Lena Khan and the FTC right now have been trying to bring it back to. They've been doing these series of workshops in which they try and get the average American or like the average business person to come in and talk to them about how consolidation or mergers in their industry have impacted them on a business or a personal level. They've been talking to a lot of farmers. They've been talking to a lot of small business owners to sort of get more feedback about the actual everyday impact of these sorts of business conduct and mergers.
When we come back, Biden's team may be aggressive on antitrust, but the courts are a different story. If you manage teams of more than 10 people, listen up. This is going to be a game changer for your team's ability to get stuff done and will make you look like a rock star to your boss, clients, and colleagues. Imagine how much more your team could accomplish together with an extra day of work each week. That's how much time you'll save with ClickUp, the one app to replace them all. ClickUp is a collaborative work hub that brings together everything organizations, managers, and teams need to do better work faster, all in one place. With ClickUp, you can build a central hub for all your tasks, projects, docs, goals, spreadsheets, and more. Align on priorities, always see the full picture of where work stands, and track progress toward goals big and small. Create workflows that adapt to your team's needs, automate routine tasks to focus on what matters, and bring team communication into one place. In fact, teams that use ClickUp report an 80% increase in productivity and collaboration. Help your team of 10 plus be more efficient and more productive with ClickUp. Use code TBD to get 15% off ClickUp's massive unlimited plan for a year, meaning you can start reclaiming your time for under $5 a month. Sign up today at clickup.com and use code TBD. Take your productivity to the next level with ClickUp today. This episode is brought to you by Schwab. Do you ever think about your money? Sure you do. You probably think about it all the time. But guess what? Your money has been thinking about you too, and it wants you to know that a financial plan can lead to 2.7 times higher net worth on average. That's why Schwab makes starting one easier than ever with one-on-one guidance from a financial consultant and a complimentary online retirement plan that you can start in as little as 15 minutes. Plus, track your progress with free digital planning tools. So what are you waiting for? Visit schwab.com/plan today to learn more. The flip side of the antitrust coin, if the FTC is on one side, is the Department of Justice on the other. What have they been doing in the Biden administration so far?
Yeah, so the Justice Department has the antitrust division, and they also enforce the antitrust laws. The FTC and the DOJ antitrust division are sort of like sister agencies. And the antitrust division right now is headed by a man named Jonathan Cantor. He's actually, pretty close to Lena Khan and Tim Wu, who is the head of competition at the White House. At the beginning of the Biden administration, these progressive activists actually made these little mugs that are now sort of collector's items. And they said Wu and Khan and Cantor. And then they were like they were so thrilled when President Biden appointed all of them. And Jonathan Cantor is a very interesting figure because he is a longtime antitrust lawyer, but he's been a huge skeptic of the tech giants, in particular Google. So he has represented a lot of the companies, the smaller tech companies who've really had problems because of Google, because of Apple, because of Amazon. And he sort of created almost like a little niche in representing people who are successful companies, but have had problems with the tech giants. And so he started at the antitrust division about a year ago. He was installed in November of 2021. And since getting there, he's really urged them to completely rethink the approach to antitrust. In the past year and a half, they have sued over 10 mergers, which is actually an unheard of number. I mean, for most of the time I've covered antitrust, which is 12 years, you would get like one of these challenges a year. And so to get 10 of them over the course of 18 months is pretty crazy. And in the majority of them, they've won. People have either, as soon as they gotten sued, abandoned their deal, or sometimes they've made them go to trial. But they won a major one between Penguin Random House and Simon & Schuster. Those are two of the largest book publishers in the U.S. They have lost 3 cases so far, but 3 out of 10 isn't all that bad. And they're still appealing in some of those. So they could come out winning at the end. And the antitrust division has also focused a lot on monopolization.
Explain that to people who don't kind of understand why focusing on monopolization is important.
Yeah, so monopolization is when a company sort of becomes the dominant player in an industry, usually if they have like a 60% market share or more, and then they start imposing conditions that make it harder for other companies to compete. So the Justice Department sued over Google. This was during the Trump administration. But under Cantor, they've also begun a number of other investigations. They have one into Ticketmaster and Live Nation.
Which will make Taylor Swift fans very happy.
Yes, it's been so interesting to watch all the Swifties become anti-monopolists. And yeah, so there's been, they have another investigation into Google. They have an investigation into Apple over the App Store. So there's just been like a really revitalizing this area, which hadn't seen very much action in the past, 2 decades.
Of course, anything that the FTC or the DOJ pursues, certainly from a progressive viewpoint, seems like it runs into a wall can run into a wall when it comes to the court system. I wonder how that figures into this equation.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. I mean, as I mentioned when we were talking about Robert Bork, he was a judge. And
many people know his failed trip to the Supreme Court.
Yeah. And so his thinking about antitrust has been very influential on the judiciary. And so the judiciary has, by and large, taken a very conservative approach to antitrust. The FTC and DOJ aren't known for being particularly progressive until recently. They, are generally suing on some of what they consider to be the most obvious cases, whether these are Republicans or Democrats. But they haven't necessarily been that successful in the courts. Only, maybe about 50% of the time would they actually win. And that has sort of had a major impact on antitrust law because, all of these cases have to go through the courts. Sometimes even if you win at the trial court level, you go through this entire antitrust trial, it gets overturned on appeal. This is something that happened to the antitrust division when it challenged American Express. This case was filed in the Obama era, continued under Trump. They won at trial, arguing that American Express's fees ended up causing, higher prices for everyone. And then it got overturned by the appeals court and the Supreme Court. So, the conservativeness of the judiciary has definitely hampered the ability of antitrust enforcers to really go after a lot of corporate conduct and mergers.
And it sounds like you're saying that's not just the Trump appointee judges. That's sort of a larger philosophical view that maybe isn't as dependent on party?
Yeah, oftentimes when a case is assigned, you do tend to look at whether it's a Republican or a Democratic appointed judge, but it doesn't really tend to matter. One of the judges who is right now overseeing the FTC's case against Meta, the very first thing he did was throw out the case. He said that they hadn't done a good enough job arguing that Facebook was a monopoly, which, when you hear that as a regular person, you're like, excuse me, I'm sorry, what? You don't think that it's like obvious that Facebook is a monopoly? But yeah, he made them go back and try again. He said, I want you to offer me more proof that Facebook is a monopoly. So they came back with some more and he said, okay, fine, I'll let it move forward. But, this was a judge appointed by Obama. And it's not, out of the norm. This sort of thing happens quite frequently.
It's not lost on me that Europe has been pursuing multiple antitrust cases and laws and kind of moving ahead with a much faster pace, I think you could arguably say, than the U.S. Do you think the United States is going to catch up, or is there just going to be this kind of big bifurcation in these two massive markets?
That's a really interesting question. As you mentioned, the EU has brought a lot of cases against the tech giants. They brought 3 different cases against Google, fined them $10 billion. They brought cases against Apple. They have a case against Amazon. They have various cases against Facebook. But one thing that they have sort of realized over in Europe is bringing these cases on a case-by-case basis has not been that effective, because the minute you start talking about how do you fix this behavior, it's very complicated. So earlier this year, they passed this new regulation called the Digital Markets Act, and it outlaws some behavior by companies if they are considered a digital gatekeeper. So there are going to be things that companies like Google, companies like Amazon, companies like Facebook can no longer do in Europe. One of those things is this self-preferencing that we talked about. Google and Amazon and Apple are no longer going to be allowed to automatically put their own products at the top of a search just because they're their products. And we've really been waiting to see whether this is something that the companies are going to do just in Europe or whether they're going to do this on a global basis.
I had a conversation with Margrethe Vestager, who is the sort of EU's antitrust cop, and she related this sort of funny anecdote. Like, she tweeted out a picture of herself and Jonathan Cantor and Lena Khan all kind of smiling and arms around each other. And it was like, oh, are you trying to telegraph something? Like, are you trying to say that you're all on the same page? And if you could, you would all sing from the same hymnal?
I mean, that was one interesting thing. The Justice Department did come out in favor of the antitrust legislation that's pending in Congress on behalf of the Obama administration. And that was, among the things that they pointed out. This is already going to happen in Europe. We might as well get with the program.
We started our conversation talking about Lena Khan's Yale Law Review piece. And it does make me wonder, like, what is the difference in practice, right? From being like an idealistic law student who had this viral article to the head of an agency who has to do a lot of politicking and a lot of cat herding. What does that mean in practice? Like, do you think she ever sits there and is like, ugh, I had this great idea and it just fell short?
I would love to actually hear her talk about this one day, because being an academic, it's a very, cerebral exercise. You're thinking about the ways in which you want to propose that things change. But being the FTC chair, you have that power. But it's much harder to do in practice than it is just to think about. And I think they've sort of seen that a little bit. One thing that a couple of the Republicans on the commission love to point out is the number of cases that they filed under Lena Khan is a lot lower than the number of cases than the Trump administration filed. And I think part of that might be that, Lena Khan was really thrown into this position as a manager of a pretty large agency. I mean, they have something like 1,200 employees. And the FTC chair is really part visionary, part manager. And sort of, combining both of those skills is probably a little difficult.
Leah, Nylen, thank you so much for talking with me.
Yeah, this has been great. Thank you for having me.
Leah Nylen is an antitrust reporter at Bloomberg News. And that is it for our show today. What Next TBD is produced by Evan Campbell. Our show is edited by Tori Bosch. Joanne Levine is the executive producer for What Next. Alicia Montgomery is vice president of audio for Slate. TBD is part of the larger What Next family, and we're also part of Future Tense, a partnership of Slate, Arizona State University, and New America. And if you are a fan of this show, I have a little request for you. Become a Slate Plus member. You can head on over to slate.com/whatnextplus to sign up. You get all your Slate podcasts ad-free, and it makes a lovely holiday gift. All right, we will be back next week with more episodes. I'm Lizzie O'Leary. Thanks for listening. This episode is brought to you by Best Buy. This year, let Best Buy be your holiday hype partner. Whether you're searching for exciting gifts, trying to snag the hottest holiday deals, or looking for ways to simplify the giving and receiving experience, Best Buy is here to help. Best Buy has the best assortment of impactful tech gifts, along with fast and free fulfillment options and great deals all season long. Maybe you're looking for an air fryer to help the aspiring foodie in your life unlock new recipes, or a new phone or camera for an aspiring filmmaker who's turning their passion into a side gig. Or you might be on the hunt for a new smartwatch to support a friend's wellness journey. No matter what you're looking for, Best Buy is your gifting destination for everyone on your list. And Best Buy makes it easy to get your gifts how and when you need them with free next-day delivery on thousands of items, as well as same-day delivery and in-store pickup options. Shop great deals on gifts now at Best Buy.